Welcome to the first session of the dissertation workshops. We will talk about the first chapter of your dissertation. The first chapter of your dissertation is very important because it sets the tone for your entire dissertation. We need to create a very good first impression. So this session will provide you with two templates to write a captivating and critical introduction chapter for your dissertation. Template 1, Template 2. There are several ways to approach the introduction chapter, so do not feel that you have to stick to these two templates. You may have your own template, or you may want to combine both of these templates into one template. It is completely up to you. If you are researching an area that does not have much literature, then perhaps you should go for the gap approach. Or if you are looking at a problem or an issue that needs to be resolved, then choose template 2, the problem approach. Always listen to your supervisor. Their advice supersedes my advice. I am not the one marking your work. They will be the one that marks your work. Just underneath this video, you can download both of these templates. The first template is the gap approach. I will now explain the gap approach. This approach is designed to show the uniqueness of your dissertation. What is a gap in research? A gap is an area that has not yet been explored or an area that is underexplored. It is a topic that is not discussed by many books or many articles. There is a gap in our knowledge. If you claim that there is a knowledge gap, that there is a research gap, this is a big claim. This is a massive claim. This is a critical claim. You will be scrutinized for this claim. So we have to make sure that there really is a knowledge gap. How do we know that there is a gap? There are essentially three ways to know. Number one, you cannot find any information. You have searched the library catalog, you have searched journal catalogs, you have searched everywhere, but you cannot find the information you want. This is an indication that there is a gap. Consult your librarian to help you if you cannot find any information. The second way to know that there is a gap is that a recent study has mentioned that there is a knowledge gap or that there is a research gap. This is great evidence for you. It is the best way to strengthen your claim that there is a gap in the literature. This is by far the strongest way. I mentioned recent study because you should try to make sure that the study that says there's a gap is at least 3 to 4 years old. Do not use a study from the 1980s or the 1990s to say that there is a gap, because maybe the gap has been filled since then. So the more recent the study, the better. Academic journals will mention the gap in their research. You will usually find this right at the beginning or towards the end of the journal article or near the conclusion section. Or you may find specific sections called future directions, future research. These sections will explain what new research is needed. These sections will explain what gaps have been identified. Lastly, an event can cause gaps, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, new legislation, new government policy, new technology, and economic downturn. These events will cause gaps because we know what happened before these events. But because these events are so recent, we don't know what happened after these events. How have these events affected the landscape? How have these events affected organizations? How have these events affected people? So we need new research now because we have a gap. This is the layout of the gap approach. 1.0 Introduction, 1.1 Context of Study, 1.2 Significance of the Study, 1.3 Aims and Objectives or Research Questions, 1.4 Overview of your dissertation. When you write your chapter, use numbers 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 3.1, 3.2, and use these numbers and subheadings to break down your writing into sections, into nice, manageable chunks. 1.0 Introduction. In the opening paragraph of your chapter, you should first state the central aim of your dissertation. Here is an example. This dissertation will critically review the task force on climate-related financial disclosures effectiveness. Then you should provide a brief background to the key terms of your dissertation. Your key terms are the terms used in the central aim. You have to imagine that the person reading your work does not know what your aim is. They do not know what you mean by your terms. So you have to break down the key terms that you will cover. For example, this student defined task force because task force on climate-related financial disclosures was a central component of their study. So they broke down this key term. This is crucial background information. Who is this task force? What is this task force? Next, the student breaks down effectiveness. What do you mean by effectiveness? Effectiveness can mean many things, so they define it. Another example. Efficacy. What do you mean by efficacy? Workplace coaching. What is that? And lastly, mental well-being. So they broke down all of these key terms to give the reader a clear understanding of what they intend to cover. In the next section, 1.1 Context of Study, you describe the area that has been underexplored or unexplored. Here is a simple format. You can describe what is available, which area has been covered. Then in red, describe what is missing. Describe the gap. Describe that there's no literature within this particular area. I have color coded this example just to make it clearer. So describe what literature we do have, what studies, what research do we currently have. Then, however, describe what is missing. Describe the gap. Be very explicit where this gap is. Describe the gap. So here are some sentences to explain the gap in research. You can cut and paste these sentences into your work. These sentences are great for giving a deeper understanding of where the academic gap is within the research. Also, in 1.1 Context of Study, you should explain why there is a knowledge gap. What could the possible reasons be for this knowledge gap? Why have scholars left this knowledge gap? You need to explain why this gap is here. This is a critical exercise because it demonstrates critical thinking. So you must use cautious language when you seek to uncover the reasons for the gap. Cautious language is needed because you may be right or wrong. So use cautious language, tread carefully. Arguably, the lack of literature in this area is due to, so as you explain what could be the possible reason for the gap, you use very cautious language. Another example, possibly the lack of studies in this area is due to, it is likely that the absence of research is due to. So after 1.1 Context of Study, then you move to 1.2. In this 1.2 section, you can either do research questions or aim and objectives. Research questions is essentially your aim rephrased into a question. It is that simple. So if you have 2 or 3 central aims, rephrase those aims into a question format. However, I prefer to do aim and objectives because it's much clearer, much more concise. And sometimes if there's 3 aims or 3 research questions, it can become muddled. So an aim is your central mission, central goal of your assignment. So an aim is the central mission or central goal or central task of your dissertation. And your objectives are the steps to fulfill that aim. So for instance, if my aim is to go to Barbados, that's my central aim. The objectives are the steps I need to take in order to get there. So I need to book my plane ticket. I need to pack a suitcase and I need to drive to the airport. So the objectives are steps to get to that central aim. So the aim of your dissertation is one thing and the steps that you need to fulfill this aim is another. You may need to cover 2 areas in order to fulfill this aim. You may need to cover 3 areas in order to fulfill this aim. It's completely up to you. Do not do more than 3 objectives or it becomes tedious. So 1 aim and 2 to 3 objectives will be fine. Here is an example of an aim and objectives. Here is another example of an aim and objectives. Here is another example of an aim and objectives. Here is another example of an aim and objectives. Now you need to explain the significance of your study in 1.3 or the rationale of your study. You have to explain the rationale for filling this gap. Just because there is a gap, it doesn't mean that you have to fill it. Not all gaps need to be filled. There may be a good reason why nobody has filled the gap. The gap may not be interesting. The gap may not be relevant. The gap may not be significant. So you must discuss the importance for filling in this gap, the reason for filling in this gap. What is the significance for filling this gap? Why did this gap need to be filled? Like in this picture, the leak or the gap has caused great problems. It has flooded the house and caused this man great distress. Equally, you have to explain that filling the gap is necessary. It is important. It would be too problematic to leave the gap as it is. You need to justify why you are filling this gap. What is the significance of your study? Here is an example from this study on minority ethnic producers employed by the BBC Asia Network. The student explains why it is necessary. Here are some more examples. And finally, you will end your introduction with an overview of the dissertation. Chapter 1, you will do this. Chapter 2, you will do this. The third chapter, you will do this. Chapter 4, you'll cover this. And finally, you'll end with chapter 5. So you will break down each section of your dissertation. You have now completed the introduction chapter of your dissertation. It will be critical and captivating. We will move on to the second template. The problem approach is perhaps the most popular. Most people will adopt the problem approach. There is a problem that needs to be addressed, and you are the superhero to save the day. Your dissertation will attempt to solve the problem, to address the problem, to ameliorate the problem. What is a problem in research? An area of concern, a conditional process to be improved upon, a difficulty to be eliminated, a contradiction that needs to be resolved. All of these are considered a problem in research. So if your research fits into any of these categories, you have a problem which your research will attempt to address, to solve, to ameliorate. Here is the layout of the problem approach. As we went through template 1, we talked about a number of these sections, so we will not repeat this. So 1.0, the introduction part, is the same as template 1. 1.3, the aims and objectives or research questions, is the same as template 1, so we will not discuss that. And 1.4, the overview of the dissertation, is the same as template. It's the same as template 1, so we will not discuss this. So we'll jump straight to 1.1, context of the study. In this section, you will need to describe the problem that your research is uncovering. Be very explicit. You also need to explain why the problem is detrimental, or why is the problem unsafe, or why is the problem unsustainable, or why is the problem contradictory, or why is the problem inconsistent. You may state the problem, but it's not clear to the marker why it is a bad thing. So you need to make sure, be very clear why this is a terrible thing, why this problem is a bad thing. Provide evidence from the literature to describe why the problem is detrimental. Also, who is it detrimental to? A problem isn't a problem for everyone, so you need to provide evidence of who the problem impacts the most. Perhaps provide evidence of the impact on the target group that you are focusing on, or the target organization that you are focusing on. And you need to provide evidence of how prevalent the problem is. Provide evidence of how widespread the problem is. If you claim this is a problem, there needs to be statistics, there needs to be figures, there needs to be facts. You need to quantify the problem. The problem must be clearly stated. So provide evidence of how prevalent or how widespread this problem is. So here is an example of what we just discussed. We'll apply what we just discussed. So this is a typical assignment question, hidden in plain sight, gender inequality in British advertising agencies. The first issue, describe the problem. What is the problem? The problem is gender inequality in British advertising agencies. Then you'll explain why gender inequality in British advertising agencies is detrimental. Then you'll describe who is most impacted from gender inequality in British advertising. And you will discuss the prevalence, how widespread, how prevalent is gender inequality in the advertising industry. We briefly state which specific occurrences or contextual factors led to the problem. The problem did not emerge out of nowhere. There's nothing new under the sun. What led to its present state? Please do not delve too deep into history. Just put forward from the literature relevant factors or conditions that led to the problem. Also, I would always put more than one factor or put more than one reason. I will postulate several factors because you may be right or wrong. So protect yourself with multiple reasons, multiple contextual factors, multiple specific occurrences. And it will show the marker that you have read widely and you have considered many things. So in this example, international student enrollment decline in the UK universities, we've identified as a problem. We've talked about how prevalent this problem is. We've talked about who this problem affects. But now we need to find out, how did we get to this stage where there's been such a decline in enrollment? What crucial factors led to this stage? And postulate several reasons for this. At least 2 or 3 reasons why we are in this present state. In the last part of 1.1, the context of study, you should describe what's currently being done to tackle the problem. If this is a problem like you stated, something must be happening to address the problem. It is unlikely that you are the only person in the entire world that has identified this problem. Which academic or practitioner articles have addressed this problem? Who has discussed this problem? What did they say about this problem? Has there been any legislation, regulation, policy to alleviate this problem? Ultimately, you have to state that not enough is being done, or that there is no significant aspect, or there is no significant impact to the problem. Because if everything was fine, then you wouldn't be writing about it. If the solutions were well developed or the government was eradicating the problem, then this would take away from your rationale. This would take away from the significance of your work. The problem is being solved, so why are you getting involved? Why are you writing about this? In the rarest of cases, if the problem is not being addressed or discussed, why is this the case? You now have to explain why you have to address the problem. What is the rationale for your research? What is driving your research to solve this problem? What is the significance of you addressing this problem? Perhaps you may argue that voices or experiences remain unheard and unshared if you do not document them. Or the prevalence of the problem continues to increase if no solutions are put forward. Or the problem is at odds with certain ideals or principles. There is a contradiction there. Ineffective interventions to the problem will continue if no solutions are put forward. So here are the 2 templates. Template 1, the gap approach. Template 2, the problem approach. They are very rough guides. You can add to them or take something away or combine both problem and gap approaches, whatever you need to do or whatever your supervisor advises. The Academic Phrase Bank is a general resource for academic writers. This is a free service, open to all. It was created for you by academics in the University of Manchester. These academics created a bank of popular phrases and keywords from academic publications. You can copy phrases from this bank and put it straight into your assignment. This is not considered plagiarism. You are not stealing other people's ideas because the phrases are content neutral and generic in nature. Even though the bank was designed for writers who are non-native speakers of English, native writers may still find much of the material helpful. In fact, recent data suggest that the majority of users are native speakers of English. On the left of the screen, you'll find several scenarios: being cautious, being critical, classifying and listing, compare and contrast. Select whichever scenario is relevant to your assignment, then click. You will find further subheadings which contain useful phrases that you can use for your assignment. You may need to be creative and adapt these phrases to suit the needs of your assignment. EThOS is the UK National Thesis Service, which houses 600,000 doctoral theses. If your lecturer completed their PhD in the UK, you can find their PhD thesis here. You can see what they were like as a student. This is a free service, open to all. You could sign up for a free British Library account, or you can just download the content without having to sign up. A doctoral thesis is a great resource to use in your assignments and dissertations. It is peer-reviewed and scrutinized by senior academics. A PhD thesis is excellent for gaining an understanding of the topic area. This is because a typical PhD thesis contains a literature review section. A literature review is typically 5 to 20 pages. The review curates the main theories, main scholars, main issues, main debates within a topic area. So just by reading these 5 to 20 pages, you could gain an overview of the entire topic area. You will know the main theories, the main issues, the main debates. This literature review will do the heavy lifting for you. You do not need to read multiple academic sources. You can just read these 5 to 20 pages. EThOS is also useful for thinking about your dissertation or research project. Additionally, EThOS is useful for thinking about your dissertation or research project. If you are unsure about how to narrow your research topic, type in the issue that you are interested in to look for inspiration. Try to find a PhD thesis in a similar area and model your research project on that thesis. Or perhaps you are unsure about some of the conventions of writing a dissertation. Look for a PhD thesis in a similar area for inspiration. When you look at this PhD thesis, you can see how to form a strong research question, or how to write a methodology, or how to structure your dissertation as a whole, because your dissertation is a mini PhD thesis. Also, why not contact the author of the PhD to ask further questions? Most people that complete their PhD are open to questions from students who are looking into similar areas. This is a short guide of how to use EThOS. This is the EThOS website. Type in the name of the area that you're interested in. I want to know about groupthink. Click here. Search. Click here. You're given two options. You could download it from the British Library from EThOS directly, or you can access it from the institution. I generally just access it from the institution. It's just much easier. Takes me straight to the PDF. Download the PDF. And here we have a literature review of corporate governance, definition of corporate governance, theories related to corporate governance. Observe what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. Thank you for listening.